But this part here, we're going to move on because we need to talk about politics in this political arena at the moment. So we've done this, a brief review of this before. We're going to end up with a biblical picture, not just a worldly view. So a few years ago, this was addressed to the Honourable the Speaker and members of the Legislative Assembly of Queensland. And it was all about yours truly. Queensland residents draw to the attention of the House certain religious organisations operating in Queensland which have a prime belief that a supreme being created the earth about 6,000 years ago. This is an anathema to many sciences, and in particular to Aboriginal culture, which is 60 to 120,000 years old. Now, I don't want to be too controversial, but I've worked with a lot of Aborigines, and time is one of the least important aspects to them. They have no concept of 60 or 120,000 years at all. They then went on to continue. The creationist religions effectively deny Aboriginal history and culture, thereby breaching our racist vilification laws, therefore. And of course, they wanted to get rid of us because this group is an evolutionist, anti-creationist, anti-Christian group. And of course, they don't want Christianity to even have the freedom to preach to Aboriginals. Funny, because I preached in a few Aboriginal churches who do want to know about where they came from. In fact, when they talk about racist, my first challenge to them is they need to define their terms. They'd use words like religion, creationist, and racist without actually defining them. So let me give you a big picture first, the one that the Aborigines would love to have in their culture. Why do I say that? Well, the last Aboriginal church I preached in, Pastor Jack said, would you please teach us what it means that God should make man in his image? Because our culture does not have that concept. Okay, man, the origin of all the humans, Adam, made in the image of God. You get Adam and his descendants, the history of man. Okay, so if you have Adam and you have Eve, could you have been racist? Obviously not. In the beginning, in the biblical picture, there's only one man and one woman. There are no separate groups that you could label racist. By the time you get from Adam to Noah, well, Noah's basically 4,500 years ago. Babel, the splitting up of the groups, Abraham, the ancestor of the Jewish people for all practical purposes, the Israelites, Moses, more specifically down to the Jewish groups after they go to Israel, and Jesus, definitely a Jew 2,000 years ago. Oh, and now we have Jewish groups which talk adamantly about being members of a Jewish race. Put it in diagrams, and again a warning to the team when I finish this diagram here, because we don't want to download people too much information in their brain to think about. Here's a biblical picture. You have Adam, you have Eve. The number of family groups is one. They have Cain, they have Abel, Cain kills Abel, and then you have the rest of the story. By the time you get a little further than that, you now have Noah. Noah, whose name, by the way, means rest. Adam's name is actually related to a color. But Noah has three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, Ham is related to a color. I mean, Ham, his name pops up well, he's a Hamite. The ancient Egyptians called themselves Hamites. They took their name from Ham, and Ham by reverse association, Ham, hot, Egypt, black. So you find Ham is traditionally associated with black people. Shem, more like Noah. His name has nothing to do with rest at all. It has nothing to do with color either. And Japheth, traditionally associated in the biblical picture with all the groups who went to Europe. There's some of them. Cush and Nimrod, descended from Ham. Nimrod, the guy associated with the Tower of Babel. By the time you get to Shem, his descendants, Eber, probably the ancestor of the word Hebrews, and Peleg. In his day, the world was divided. And Japheth, Javan, Tarshish, the Greeks, the Spaniards, etc. And you can trace this historically. These people actually have given locations of where they lived and locations of where they went to. So keep thinking, you team out there. races, Cush. Yes, there's even pictures of the Cushites in Egypt on the pyramids, and they are black. They're descended from Ham. Then Shem, well, the Israelites pride themselves on being descended from Abraham, who's descended from Shem. Ah, now Shem, there is no indication he'd gone black or he'd gone white. His name is not a color-based name. So therefore, whatever color Noah was, Shem was probably the same. And whatever color Noah was is probably the color of Adam. Whereas Japheth, most people traditionally associate Japheth with the Japhethites, the Javanites, the Tarshishians, etc. And they're historically always on the lighter side of brown, which brings us to this big picture. You see, when the pastor, the Aboriginal pastor, said, I want you to preach about man being made in the image of God, because our culture has a knowledge of a God who created. In fact, one of the Aboriginals I know became a Christian because his grandma had prayed, we know who you are as the creator. We just don't know you. Can you send somebody to tell us about you? And a week later, a missionary arrived who began, God made us in his image. And then an image was defaced by sin, Genesis chapter 3. By the time you get all the way down to Australia, no, Australia is not mentioned, Aboriginal is not mentioned, Europeans as a word is not mentioned. But by the time you get down to Australia, sin has influenced everything. And by the time you get to the book of Acts, where the gospel is going out, again a reminder that God made all nations, whether you're Greek, whether you're Jewish, whether you're British, whether you're Aboriginal, whether you are Chinese. God made all nations from one man to live on the earth at the time and in the places he appointed so they would seek the Lord. Okay, so what you find is you have a picture in which the guys who are pushing for the politicians of Queensland to ban creation research, yours truly, Diane, Craig Hawkins, were doing so because they said it denies the real history of Aborigines. Now, here's the conflict. The Bible claims to be not just the opinion of Moses. If you look at Exodus chapter 20, it says, this is the word of the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, and then he gave him the 10 commandments. He wrote them with his own hand and gave Moses the 2 tablets of stone. So the Bible does not claim to be the opinions of any man. It certainly can't be the opinion of Adam because he wasn't there for the first 5.5 days. So whatever happened before that, God had to tell him, or it's just a sheer silly guess about God. When you look at the 10 commandments, it claims this is the word of the Lord to Moses. Funny thing, the 10 commandments includes a statement about always telling the truth. You could never have a fake statement that God gave it if you're going to tell a command statement to punish people for not telling the truth. Man, caught in your own petard. So what you find is those guys were wanting one history, which was, well, the actual history of Australia, 60,000, 100,000. Well, when I was a kid, there were no such figures. The Aborigines, 4,000, 10,000 years, 40,000 ultimately by the time I finished university. Now it's longer and longer and longer. There are no doubt about the guys pushing these political views have adopted a belief system which is contrary to Christianity. It's contrary to the big picture of man.